Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Between Two Beths. I am Beth Y. I'm based in Maryland, outside Washington, D.C. area, and I'm a certified life coach and transition specialist. Um, so my focus is that I help people moving who are widowed move from existing to living life fully. So my cohort and colleague is also a Beth, and I'll let her introduce herself to you.
Awesome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whatever, like you said, Beth, and good morning, afternoon to us, and to you. I am Beth M, and I am a holistic nutrition consultant, expert, and health coach. And I am a champion for the midlife caregiver. I love to help her renew her energy by redefining self-care because self-care is something we as caregivers tend to let fall to the bottom of our priority list, if not off the priority list at all, without doing more. We can actually take care of ourselves without adding more to do because we can redefine what self-care looks like for us.
Absolutely. So today we're going to talk about loneliness. And particularly in this season, this holiday season, loneliness affects many of us for different reasons, but particularly when, as a caregiver who may be in isolation, excuse me, or somebody that is grieving or is even past the initial grief process, um, this time of year kind of harks to loneliness.
Yes.
Um, and I'd also like to mention that there's loneliness, which is like a deficit in your void of interaction, feel maybe isolated. But then there's alone, and there's a distinction between loneliness and alone. Alone can be a choice,
Yep.
loneliness is not. And I know, so I'm a widow. I have migrated from loneliness to alone,
Mm.
but loneliness hits home for me still around the holidays. And that's normal for me, and I recognize it. Um, and I'm there's ways that I cope with it and that I deal with it. Um, but it's still something that's very real for me. And you know, and loneliness is can be about isolation, but you can also be lonely in a crowd of people just because you are going through what you're going through and others are not. So, what are your thoughts on that, Beth?
Well, it's the absolute truth for sure. And loneliness and aloneness, I'm glad you mentioned that because they are so distinctive. And I was thinking, having been a caregiver, I was lonely so much for what I was missing, for the things that I could would normally have done or things like that, right? We're lonely. And you mentioned you can be lonely in a group of people just because you feel like you're the only one who's dealing with what you're dealing with. Whether you know what others are dealing with or not, it doesn't matter. You just still feel that loneliness. But when you're a caregiver, you're with someone often, a lot. And I am more of an introvert. So when I am with people all the time, that really takes away my energy. I recharge when I'm alone. So when you're a caregiver, you're actually seeking, I was actually seeking some alone time. And that's something that we don't get very much, but that is a real part of redefining self care because there might be extroverts who are caregiving and they actually thrive more being with people, but they might still need some time to be alone to take care of themselves. But the holidays are extremely isolating when you are a caregiver because of that comparing others. And I was kind of looking outside now because you're kind of looking at people, your neighbors, or the people driving down the street, or those in the grocery store, and you're seeing them as continuing their normal life, whether they are or not, because you don't know if they are or not, but you know you're not. And so that brings a sense of loneliness, of aloneness, or not maybe aloneness because it's not the same, but that loneliness, that feeling of you're the only one. And that's another reason I just like to say that between two Beths, the reason we're getting together to talk is to help you understand that you're not alone in what you're feeling or what you're going through.
It was interesting. I was having a conversation just the other day with a friend of mine. It is, you know, tomorrow is Thanksgiving in the US. And so we were talking about the pending Thanksgiving holiday. And so she was asking what I was doing. And I said, I'm I'm forcing myself to kind of step outside my comfort zone. I'm going to take my own life coaching advice and apply it to myself. So I am picking the option that is the least comfortable to me in that I am going to somebody's home, to my niece's fiance's family's house, whom I don't really know, but I've decided to expand my horizons, right? And I very much appreciate them, inviting me. And I said, I had other options. And I said, actually, the one I was really leaning toward was just staying home by myself. But, and I'd be perfectly happy doing that. Um, but yeah, so loneliness and alone, um, in that case, like I said, the alone would have been my choice,
Yes.
right? Um, and I know that many, and I was trying to describe it to her, kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. I was trying to describe it to her. I said, when you, as a widow, and you're a we, you're in a primary unit, right?
Yes.
Now, my husband and I did not have children,
Okay.
right? So after my husband passed away, it was just me.
Yes.
Now I'm in a secondary unit, right? So I'm nobody's primary.
I see.
And she was trying to wrap her head around that. And she said, well, I guess I don't understand because I'm not in that position and I haven't been through it.
Yes.
And I said, well, think about it. I said, everybody has their customs and their traditions. Like, so my brother and his wife go to her family for Thanksgiving every year. So that's what they do, and that's what they've done for 20 years. Right. And so for them, their life hasn't changed, whereas everything has shifted. And that's where, I said at the beginning of this session that for me, I struggle. This is the time of year where I struggle with loneliness.
Yeah.
Um, the other 10 months out of the year, I'm perfectly okay being alone. I'm very independent. I have my hobbies. I have my things. I take classes. I'm always taking classes. Um, and I do a lot on alone, centered on personal growth and self-care,
Yeah.
right? Um, but the loneliness is something, as I said, I struggle with this time of year. So how does that apply to the caregiver? That's
Well, it applies to the caregiver in that the loneliness that we're actually feeling, other than the anticipatory grief that we might be experiencing, is a loss, a loneliness in what we're doing and what we're lacking, the regularity of what we usually do. It's the missing of some of those things that we normally look
yeah,
forward to, or the hobbies, or the ways we would go out with girlfriends, or um, other families or whatever, being invited to other people's homes. Maybe as a caregiver for me, I was at a distance from my husband Steve and from my support system because my mom lived cross country, and so I moved there at a time to help care for her. So I had my the regular people that I would have done things with and was around. So the loneliness is that loss and that loneliness for some of those other things, as well as you're you're grieving some of how your loved one is changing right in front of you and how you're watching that. And I realize that all caregiving seasons aren't um, seeing necessarily a loved one decline to the end of their life, but so many are. And so that's really where it hits the loneliness and isolation, and then not being able to get out and get away, maybe wanting to take up some go out with a friend, or know that your family is getting together or friends are getting together, but that you just can't participate. What I would say is that if other family is getting together and you aren't able to because of your caring for your loved one, that you guys have some hard conversations either this year or for the next year, because caregiving is not an individual, a solo game. It is something that we must share with each other. I did want to ask you a question, Beth, when you were talking about um, getting out and being with people. Talk to, or being alone, and that, and the choice that you made. Talk to the person who is struggling to, oh, what was I was going to say, oh, I've lost my train of thought about the difference between um, the choice, the way you made your choice, the person who chooses to stay home alone instead of going out. What would you say to that person to encourage them to step outside of their comfort zone, I guess, in going out?
Um, well, a lot of it has to do with, um, at least for me, the benefit of me going to my niece's fiance's family, um, whom I may have met one of the family members besides him. Part of it for me was they don't know my backstory,
Yeah.
right? And so I thought, here's an opportunity. They're also Peruvian. So
Oh,
I thought that would be an interesting experience. I've been to Peru. I left Peru. But from a culinary perspective as well.
yes.
But it was refreshing for me because they didn't know my backstory, whereas, all the others know my backstory. And one of the points I think I would like to make is that I think sometimes people um, are uncomfortable with you as being a widowed person, and being in a unintentionally, I should say, they mean well, but it's
Yes.
uncomfortable for them. Sometimes it's awkward because you're
Yes.
almost like the third wheel sometimes
Yes.
in this gathering of people who are all paired up. And so
Yeah.
that goes back to that loneliness factor.
Yeah.
Um, and so one of the things that I tend to do is I have a friend who is also a widow.
Yes.
Um, and we tend to be each other's plus one, right? For those
Yes.
situations. Um, so that we are not the one sitting, off to the side by
Yeah.
ourselves. So what I would say is in that situation, if you have multiple options on the table, I mean, weigh your options. You don't have to do anything if that's what you're comfortable with
That's right.
and that works for you. And some people don't understand that, but they're not in your shoes.
That's right.
But weigh the options. And for me, like I said, that was the decision-making process for me. So
Nice.
what kind of aligns to your priorities, your values, your goals,
Yes.
and make your choices that way. Um,
Yes.
will I be uncomfortable? I'm an introvert. I don't like going into crowds with people I don't know. My niece is very extroverted, so I'm sure she'll take me under her wing. Um, but yeah, it'll be awkward.
Yeah.
Tomorrow I'll wake up with, butterflies in my tummy because I'm making myself do something new,
Yeah.
but you don't grow. You don't
That's right.
grow as a person unless you challenge yourself to do new things.
That's right. That's great. And that is true in the caregiver circle as well. The loneliness maybe comes a little more from the lack of ability to be able to do things. But you brought up a really good point about other people. And as far as caregivers, this is a huge thing as well, is that our friends tend to kind of fall away a little as you're caregiving, because if you say no to a coffee or a lunch or whatever once, maybe they'll ask again or whatever. But often if you aren't able to go, they stop asking, and they don't always know how to talk to you about what is going on with you right now. And you mentioned they don't understand, they don't get it, they've not gone through it. That's the empathy side, right, of caregiving and widowhood. When you aren't going through it, you really don't know. So don't ever say to someone who's caregiving or has lost a loved one, if you haven't lost that same experience, have gone through that same experience, don't ever say you know what they're going through. Just offer to be with them. Just offer to take them to dinner or bring them a coffee or whatever it is, right? Help allow them to go through it the way they need to. And because you don't understand that until you've been there. And that contributes though to the loneliness, right?
Yeah.
Because there's nobody around really that's saying, I get it.
Yeah. And in my experience, even though I've gone through it, my experience could have been completely different than somebody else's.
Yeah.
So while yes, I understand that they're going through a period of grief and mourning, or
Yes.
that certain times of the year are, more difficult for them.
Yeah.
Um, but we're all a product of our past experiences. And just because mine was my way doesn't mean it was the same for you.
That's
And
right.
so, yeah, just, be that supportive person. Just say,
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah.
I tell people that, and you mentioned, if you don't make, a dinner or a coffee, and they might ask again, or maybe another time, but eventually, but ultimately, as widowed people, caregivers, etc. I use the term go from a we to a me, right? And so many of your friend circle when you're married and your spouse is alive is
Mhm.
couple based,
Yeah.
right?
True.
And so I tell people often that over time, just recognize that your tribe is going to change.
Yeah.
Some of them will drop off and you'll have others, included in.
Yeah.
Um, so, and some of those, and some of those maybe, not everybody's meant to be in your life
Yeah.
for maybe, it's a chapter, maybe it's a
Season.
season,
Mhm.
maybe it's for life, but not everybody is going to be in your life forever. And it's okay to accept that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard. That's also a form of grief when you lose those
Absolutely.
friends.
Absolutely.
That contributes to the loneliness.
Mhm.
But you know, and I go back to kind of where we started with um, alone is a choice,
Yeah.
right? Loneliness is not.
Yeah.
And being alone, when you get to that point where you embrace alone,
Yeah.
like you,
Hmm.
I need to be able to read my book. I need my time to charge.
Yeah.
I need my space. I need my alone time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what fuels me.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So, any other points you want to bring up before we wrap up today's session?
The only other thing I would say about loneliness and caregiving is that if you are lonely, reach out to somebody else with a text, with a phone call, and just start that connection. Because if it is a friend who didn't know what to say to you or doesn't understand what you're going through, they might really welcome that reach out from you. And I think as caregivers, we really want someone to reach out to us and come alongside us, but sometimes it takes us reaching out to them. So I would just say, especially the holiday season, just reach out to somebody if you're lonely. Even Beth or I, as far as, someone to talk to or whatever, but a friend or a family member, someone just to say, to say hi and start that conversation. And maybe that loneliness will change a little for you. But this has been great
Yeah,
again, Beth.
that's an excellent point, Beth, because I think a lot of people don't know how to start that
Yeah,
conversation. But if you initiate, then they're there and they are supportive. They're just not comfortable with approaching you
absolutely.
because they
Absolutely.
think it may hurt you or may upset you or
That's
whatever the
right.
case may be.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
great conversation, Beth.
Yes, excellent. Good to see you again, Beth. And everybody, thanks for joining and listening. And we'll see you again soon. Okay?
See you next time, everybody.
Take care.